I'm Aaron Fawn, and I'm on a trip for life.
I believe our future depends powerfully on how well we understand this cosmos, in which we float like a mote of dust in the morning sky.
The Land Institute was founded in 1976 by plant geneticist and certified MacArthur genius Wes Jackson and his wife Dana Jackson in order to work towards a more sustainable and environmentally responsible agricultural system. With the help of other leading lights in their fields, such as Angus Wright and Donald Vorster from the field of environmental science, the land soon settled upon perennial agriculture as being the most useful and attainable goal. Now, after decades of work, the Institute has not only developed many novel scientific methods, but are approaching the stage of their research where the actual work of breeding and producing the chosen species of new crops can begin. It is difficult to understand how audacious this goal is without a bit of context. With the exception of almonds, no new crop species have been bred by humanity for literally thousands of years, and the land hopes to breed several new species of agricultural plants over the next decade or so. This alone would be a major achievement, but the Land Institute has even greater goals: to change agriculture as we know it, from a system that revolves around annual monocultures to one that favors perennial polycultures.
Could you describe just very broadly what the Land Institute's objectives are and how and its founding and how that got started?
We start here from the premise that the only truly sustainable vegetation on a given landscape is the one that is as close as possible to the original vegetation that evolved there on that landscape. So we, in this part of the country, of course, and through a large part of the center of the country, the prairie is the original vegetation that was here for a very long time before European people came here. In the case of this area, almost 150, well, about 150 years ago. So our goal is to develop an agriculture that performs the same or similar ecological functions as the prairie did, and most importantly, to preserve and nourish and build soil, to use water efficiently and not pollute water, and the one thing that we're trying to add into that is to produce food, and that leads to what we spend a lot of our time doing, which is in breeding perennial grain crops. The prairie is 100% perennial plants that grow back spontaneously each year, have long-lived, deep, diverse root systems. What we have now on our normal landscape in Kansas are plants like wheat, soybean, sorghum, and corn, which are planted each year. For much of the year, there are no roots in the soil, or there are very small roots that pretty much rob the soil of a lot of what makes it soil, which is a living root system. So we're trying to put the good features of those two systems together. The grain production, very productive grain production that we have in our agricultural fields, and the ecological soundness of the prairie.
That segues perfectly into the next question, which is, you've been at this for quite some time, since the 1980s here at the Land Institute. Why has it taken so much time, and what is it about this project that requires such a long-term vision?
Well, we actually haven't been at the breeding phase of this for very long. The initial hybridizations, the crosses, or the initial selections that led to the plants that you see here were made in 2002 to 2003. So it's less than 10 years that we've been pursuing the breeding programs. Now, the Land Institute has been here since 1976, and a lot of that time was spent doing the research that shows that a lot of that time was spent in doing the research to establish what the ecological functions of a diverse prairie ecosystem versus agricultural system are, to make the case that we do need to convert to a new kind of diverse perennial system, and to begin sorting through the huge catalog of perennial plants that are out there to determine which would be the best candidates either to domesticate or to hybridize with annual plants to produce the kind of grain plants we need. Because the one thing that was absent from this vision was the actual perennial grain producing plants that we needed.
The Land Institute is currently working to convert wild plants to domesticated ones. Sounds easy, but it isn't. Wild plants have a lot of traits that are beneficial to them, but would not work well once they are domesticated. For one, many seeds produced by wild plants will either not germinate the first year after shedding, or won't germinate at all. This helps to protect them against bad seasons, but would be kind of a pain in an agricultural situation. So, in order to breed out these traits, the scientists at the land have to sort seeds. Lots and lots of seeds. And they have to keep close track of how many of those seeds are sterile and, well, it's probably best to have a scientist who's working on this problem explain it. Would you like to say a little bit about what you're doing over here?
So this is part of a project looking at patterns of fertility and sterility, depending on how you want to look at it, in intermediate wheatgrass. And so there's, yeah, sure. I can show some of the heads if you like.
So this is an example of the intermediate wheatgrass that they're speaking of. As you can see, it's a grass species, and it's very similar to wheat, albeit the heads are not nearly as compact.
And so I'll just use one to show. So what we're doing is taking apart the whole spike, and then separating the individual spikelets all the way up. So we're getting an idea of number of spikelets per head, length of the head, all sorts of other covariates that will go along with the data that we're taking. And so all of the spikelets are made up of groups of florets, and each floret can have a seed. And so it's very tedious work, but we're looking for position effects, basically, and looking for like I said, the patterns of fertility and sterility. And so we're taking them apart, and so when you count, you start from the bottom, and so spikelet number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and then within each spikelet, the bottom floret is number 1, and then you get the idea. Mm-hmm. And so then we're taking apart all of the florets and taking out the seeds, and then weighing the seeds, and then just putting in zeros for missing seeds. And so that will give us an idea of what's going on as far as whether it's more environmentally based or genetically based as far as the sterility goes. Mm-hmm. And so in intermediate wheatgrass, I believe the development starts at the top of the head. And so if we see a lot of seeds that are toward the top of the plant, and there's not very much on the bottom, you can kind of say, oh, this is probably environmental. It's nutrient limited. They're using up all the nutrients, and they're not so much at the bottom. If we see just kind of a random distribution of seeds and seed weights, then we can say that it's more likely a problem, a genetic problem. There's several studies that have been done on other perennial species that have found major, what they call sterility genes, and so that could be another finding.
So in the long term, the objective would be to breed these sterility genes out so that the maximum fertility is observed.
Exactly. And so this should also give a good idea for Lee, who's kind of in charge of the intermediate wheatgrass here. It should also give him a good idea of what to select for. So if something is correlated with something else, we should be able to tease apart that by looking at this in so much detail.
There's a lot of work to do yet. Many people can claim to be buried by their work, but the scientists at the Land Institute seem almost under siege by it, since so many of the workspaces are literally surrounded by test plots. But, given their long-term vision, this is no problem. It just means that they have to delay the gratification of completing the project until it's actually done, many years from now. In the end, the environment at the land might be down to earth and rustic, but their ambition is reaching for the sky. So, what sort of plants are they trying to domesticate? Well, many of them may not be familiar to you, and thus you might wonder why they should put so much effort into them. Let's return to Dr. Stan Cox to answer these concerns.
I've read that you're working to domesticate productive versions of wild perennials such as the Illinois bundleflower. What benefits do you hope to achieve by domesticating this plant, and why is this plant a better choice than perhaps some of the other endemic perennial plants that have been brought into the States by Europeans?
Yes, we're following kind of a two-track system. One track is to domesticate plants like Illinois bundleflower and a couple of other species in a kind of the same way that our ancestors 5,000 to 10,000 years ago domesticated wild annual plants to give us the annual plants we have today. The other track that we're pursuing is hybridizing annual and perennial plants that are closely enough related that we can interpollinate them. Illinois bundleflower is an excellent candidate for domestication because it is one of the biggest seed producers of any of the native perennial prairie plants that we have. It's also a legume, which is very important because that means that it fixes nitrogen from the air and gets nitrogen into a usable form that plants can use. Illinois bundleflower is not related very closely enough to any of our familiar crop plants to cross with them, so that's why we're selecting in that species now for some of the basic traits that are needed for it to be a crop.
Dr. Cox raises a point I want to emphasize. Some of their best prospects cannot interbreed with conventional crops. There will be a period of time where the two agricultural systems, annual and perennial, are existing side by side, and preventing unintentional crossbreeding is vital for preserving the genetic integrity of the plants involved in both systems. In the end, preserving our agriculture, our environment, and our lives is the objective, and choosing to start from scratch may seem more difficult, and it probably is, but it will save us from encountering even greater difficulties down the road.
The sky calls to us. If we do not destroy ourselves, we will one day venture to the stars.
The Land Institute is not done with its work, and I'm not done either. On the next episode of TTFL, join me to see how the land is expanding to meet new challenges, and for some interesting discussions about how the land does what they do, and what hurdles outside of the lab they anticipate in the future.